SMU political science professor Matthew Wilson. Welcome back to Eye on Politics.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So how do you size up this Republican primary between Senator John Cornyn and Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton for U.S. Senate?
I think it's going to be a bitter, hotly contested, very expensive primary campaign. Both of these men have large followings. Both of them will have large war chests. I think that the fact that primaries tend to play to the more activist, more energized, more ideological base of a given political party definitely gives Paxton a leg up. I could easily see either candidate emerging, but I think Paxton feels pretty good about his chances of running this sort of insurgent campaign given the nature of the Texas Republican primary electorate.
Right, and that's because those primary voters are more apt to actually vote.
That's right, because the people who are likely to turn out in March in a party primary are the much more politically energized, politically activist folks. That means on the Republican side, they tend to be more conservative. On the Democratic side, it means they tend to be more liberal. They tend to be from the more activist ideological wing of the party. And those are exactly the people who are most enamored of Ken Paxton. So I think he knows that. I think he realizes that that gives him a realistic chance of prevailing in a primary contest. And I think that's why he's thrown his hat in the ring.
So that's going to pose a challenge to Senator Cornyn. And how do you think he best is going to fight that and to really turn out his voters during the primary?
I think the challenge for Senator Cornyn is going to be to broaden the electorate and to get more participation than you would typically see in a primary contest. He's going to need to make this a high engagement primary where a broad cross-section of Texas Republicans show up to vote, not just the most ideological activists. And so I think he'll spend a lot of money doing that. He'll spend a lot of money on Get Out the Vote. He'll spend a lot of money on television advertising. He'll spend a lot of money really demonizing Ken Paxton, trying to paint him as a dangerous radical, corrupt, etc., because his key for retaining his seat and retaining the Republican nomination is going to be to paint Paxton as undesirable and outside the mainstream.
And is that really his best focus? Is that really the best way to hold Paxton off?
I think it's really his only strategy forward, because we know that Paxton has a very strongly energized core base. That is, the Republican activists in the state tend to like Ken Paxton. They rallied to his defense when he was facing impeachment. They have thought that he has been persecuted in the courts, et cetera, et cetera. So to counteract that, Cornyn needs to bring in a broader cross-section of voters, people who aren't necessarily activists, people who aren't necessarily the most ideological Republicans, and that could work to his advantage.
So let me ask you, what does Senator Cornyn need to answer for?
The biggest thing that Senator Cornyn will have to answer for is his criticism of Donald Trump in the past, because we know that Donald Trump is broadly popular among Texas Republicans. And Ken Paxton will make the argument that Cornyn has been disloyal to Trump, that Cornyn has not been on board with the Trump agenda and the MAGA project. And we know that the Trump agenda and the MAGA project are pretty popular among the kinds of people who are likely to vote in a Texas Republican primary. So Cornyn's going to have a good answer for why he was skeptical about Trump's electoral prospects back in early 2024.
And even before that, in 2023, because I asked him, he had made comments saying it's time for the Republican Party to move past Donald Trump, and he had skepticism about his ability to win in November 2024. Obviously, we know what happened. Cornyn's answer is going to be, well, I came out after New Hampshire and I endorsed him in January of 2024. Is that good enough?
We'll see if it's good enough. I mean, we're going to see played on a loop in Ken Paxton's ads Cornyn's expressions of skepticism about Trump's electoral prospects. We're all going to know that back in 2023, Cornyn doubted whether Trump could get reelected to the presidency. Now, what I think Cornyn will say in response is, whatever my assessment of the likelihood of his reelection was, I have been with him on all the issues, right? I agree with Trump's agenda when it comes to reducing the size of government. I agree with Trump's agenda when it comes to wokeness, to transgenderism, to all the hot button issues that Trump has hit on. Cornyn will say, I am right in line with the president on all of these substantive questions. That should matter a lot more than who we thought might get elected back in 2023.
And what does AG Ken Paxton have to answer for?
Well, the things that Paxton will have to speak to are the various corruption allegations that have dogged him for years now. Some of those have been more or less put to bed. Others continue to linger. There is an aura of corruption, rightly or wrongly, that has surrounded all of Paxton's candidacies and that has surrounded his running of the Attorney General's office. We know that Cornyn is going to hammer on that. He's going to try to paint him as untrustworthy, self-interested, more interested in media attention than in actual governance. He'll have to demonstrate that he is a responsible, honest candidate for the Senate seat. And I think that the types of attacks that we're going to see from each side are going to make this a particularly bitter contest.
And, you know, when you hear what the Attorney General has said in his launch of his campaign and even in defense of the whistleblower case, which started all of this impeachment investigation, is that this was just Democrats coming for him. This was just certain Republicans ganging up against him and joining Democrats to try to take him out of his seat. How do you think that's going to be enough? Certainly for his supporters it's enough because they agree with it, but for the general electorate or even, you know, for the voters that Senator Cornyn is going to have to try to get to vote in the primary, is that going to be a good enough explanation?
I think we'll see Ken Paxton try to liken himself to Donald Trump. He'll say, look, they tried to impeach Donald Trump twice. They launched all these lawsuits and criminal prosecutions against Donald Trump, but he survived all of that and he emerged to be reelected president. They've used the same things against me. They tried to impeach me. They tried to put me in jail. They've launched all these lawsuits against me. Like Trump, I'm still standing. Like Trump, I am the victim of a partisan witch hunt. I think that's very much going to be the line from Ken Paxton. And that's a line that might not win over the broadest Texas electorate, but it's going to play really well among Republican primary voters. And I think that's the challenge that John Cornyn faces, is that Ken Paxton's theory of the case is one that is intuitively appealing to the kinds of people who vote in Republican primaries.
And you brought up governance before, and when we were talking to former Fort Worth Mayor Betsy Price the other day, she had said that when she was in office for 10 years, you know, the senator was always here, he's always in town, he's always back in the state. And is that something, is that, you know, line that she had, does that resonate with voters?
I think it can. I think that Cornyn will have to make the case that his tenure in Washington has brought tangibly good things to the people of Texas, and that he does work that is meaningful on behalf of his constituents that Paxton will not do. We'll see if he can make that case. You know, there's a distinction that political scientists talk about between workhorses and show horses. And I think John Cornyn's going to say, look, I'm a workhorse. I'm not trying to get media attention. I'm trying to get the job done. I'm trying to do real governance. Ken Paxton is a show horse. Ken Paxton wants to win accolades from the activists. He wants to appear on Fox News. He wants to get social media attention. But I'm doing the hard work while he's out seeking that. We'll see how well that plays, but I'm sure that will be a line of attack from Cornyn.
And then, of course, what everybody's really wondering in this race is President Trump going to get involved? Is he going to endorse Ken Paxton? Some believe, and some have told us they think that he could endorse Senator Cornyn. Others say he may just wait and see how it all, you know, ferrets out. So what do you think is going to happen, and how big of a deal will it be if he does or if he doesn't?
Donald Trump likes to get in on the winning side, and my suspicion is that if he sees one or the other candidate starting to pull away, that's when he'll jump in and try to contribute to that momentum. so that he can then afterwards tell the story that he was instrumental in producing that victory. That's a pattern we've seen play out in a variety of Republican primary contests around the country over the years. If it looks very closely fought, I suspect he'll stay out of it. But if one or the other establishes a clear lead, we may well see Donald Trump come in on the side of the presumptive victor.
And then let's talk about Democrats, because we've heard that Colin Allred, former Dallas congressman, may jump in, and he says he's seriously considering it. And what do you think of that? And do you think now that Paxton is in, more Democrats maybe have to jump in because they would love to run against Paxton perhaps more than they would Cornyn?
Yeah, I think that the likelihood of an acrimonious Republican primary gives Democrats a fighting chance. It's going to be a midterm election year with a Republican president. That means that by historical norms, it'll probably be a fairly favorable Democratic environment nationally. You compound that with the potential bitterness that will cause whoever the Republican nominee is to emerge damaged from the primary. And if Democrats can be unified, it gives them at least a puncher's chance at this seat. Colin Allred probably has more name recognition than any other Democrat statewide because he ran in the last cycle. So I think that means there is a fair likelihood that he would jump in. We know he's got a formidable fundraising apparatus. And so I think it does provide an opening and an opportunity there. Others might try to jump in the race, but I think Colin Allred would have to be regarded as the odds-on favorite to win the Democratic primary, to get that nomination if he in fact decides to make a bid.
It would be an interesting dynamic because when Congressman Allred was running against Senator Cruz, he would often cite votes that he agreed with that Cornyn made that Cruz didn't. CHIPS Act is one of them that comes to mind. So isn't that make it a little more challenging for him if he runs, or any Democrat?
It would. I think that Colin Allred's line would be, look, John Cornyn is an honorable man who once had good sense, who has sold his soul to the MAGA movement to try to keep his seat. Now, whether that's true or fair is another question, but if you're the Democrat, that's your line of attack, right? To say that whatever Cornyn once was, he's now 100% on board with MAGA. And you try to run against what you will describe as the radicalism and the chaos of the Trump administration and the Trump regime. And so I think that will be the line of attack that we'll hear from Allred, or frankly, whoever the Democratic nominee is.
SMU political science professor Matthew Wilson, thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me.
We appreciate it.